The moment I saw Patricia Brennan sprawled across my grandfather's front porch, her designer blazer covered in wood stain and her perfectly manicured hands locked behind her back in genuine police-grade handcuffs, I knew this HOA nightmare had finally reached its breaking point. She was screaming something about assault and false imprisonment while my 72-year-old grandfather calmly recited her Miranda rights from memory. The small crowd of neighbors who had gathered were recording everything on their phones, and I could already imagine the headlines that would follow. It had all started 6 months earlier when I moved into my grandfather's cabin in Pine Ridge Estates to help him after his hip surgery. The cabin had been in our family for 3 generations, a rustic 2-bedroom structure nestled between towering Douglas firs at the end of Evergreen Lane. My grandfather, Thomas Fitzgerald, had lived there peacefully for 40 years until Patricia Brennan was elected HOA president and decided his property was an eyesore that needed immediate correction. The first violation notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, typed on official HOA letterhead and taped to our mailbox. According to Patricia, our natural wood siding violated the neighborhood's updated color palette requirements. The cabin needed to be painted in one of 6 approved shades of beige or gray within 30 days or face daily fines of $100. My grandfather had laughed when he read it, crumpling the paper and tossing it into the fireplace. He had no idea that Patricia Brennan did not take being ignored lightly. The notices began arriving daily after that. Our stone pathway was not regulation width. The bird feeders exceeded the maximum allowed number of wildlife attractants. The vegetable garden in the side yard violated the ornamental plants only policy. Each notice came with increasingly steep fines and shorter compliance deadlines. Patricia had apparently made it her personal mission to bring our cabin into what she called aesthetic harmony with the rest of Pine Ridge Estates. I tried reasoning with her at first. I attended an HOA meeting where I explained that my grandfather was recovering from surgery and that the cabin had existed in its current state since before the HOA was even established. Patricia had smiled that cold smile of hers and informed me that grandfather clauses no longer applied under the new bylaws she had personally drafted. She actually said those words with a straight face, as if the irony was completely lost on her. The other board members sat silent, clearly too intimidated to challenge her. The harassment escalated quickly after that meeting. Patricia began conducting what she called compliance walks past our property 3 times a day, taking photos and making notes on her ever-present clipboard. She measured the height of our grass with an actual ruler. She complained that the smoke from our chimney exceeded acceptable opacity levels. She even filed a formal complaint about the volume of my grandfather's classical music, which he played softly in the evenings while reading. My grandfather, despite his age, was not a man easily intimidated. He had spent 35 years as a state police officer before retiring, and he knew his rights better than most lawyers. When Patricia started leaving increasingly threatening notices about forced entry inspections, he simply installed new locks and security cameras. When she claimed the HOA had the right to access any property for compliance verification, he posted no trespassing signs and sent her a certified letter citing state law. The situation reached a boiling point on a Thursday afternoon in late September. I was inside making lunch when I heard Patricia's shrill voice demanding entry. She was standing on our porch with 2 other HOA board members, waving a document she claimed gave her the authority to conduct an interior inspection. My grandfather, still moving slowly from his surgery, had answered the door and was blocking her path with his walker. Patricia announced loudly enough for the entire neighborhood to hear that she had reasonable suspicion we were harboring non-compliant interior modifications. She claimed an anonymous source had reported unauthorized renovations and code violations that posed a threat to property values. My grandfather calmly asked to see her warrant. When she insisted her HOA authority superseded the need for a warrant, he laughed in her face and began to close the door. That was when Patricia made her critical mistake. She wedged her foot in the door and tried to push past my grandfather, shouting that she would have him arrested for obstruction. In one fluid motion that belied his recent surgery, my grandfather stepped back, used his walker to sweep her foot aside, and slammed the door shut. We could hear her pounding on the wood, screaming about calling the police and having us evicted. My grandfather was already on the phone with his former colleague, Sheriff Deputy James Morrison. He explained the situation calmly while Patricia continued her tirade outside. Within 10 minutes, Deputy Morrison arrived to find Patricia attempting to peer through our windows while shouting into her cell phone about emergency HOA enforcement. The deputy listened to both sides, reviewed the HOA documents Patricia thrust at him, and then politely informed her that HOA rules did not override state trespassing laws. Patricia was apoplectic with rage. She declared that she would return with proper legal backing and that we would rue the day we crossed her. My grandfather smiled and informed Deputy Morrison, loudly enough for Patricia to hear, that he would be ready with his old service handcuffs if she tried to force entry again. The deputy had to suppress a grin as he encouraged Patricia to pursue any grievances through proper legal channels. For 2 weeks, we enjoyed relative peace. Patricia's compliance walks stopped, and no new notices appeared. I foolishly believed she had given up or perhaps consulted a lawyer who explained the limitations of HOA authority. My grandfather knew better. He said Patricia was the type who would stew in her anger and come back with what she thought was a foolproof plan. He spent those 2 weeks reviewing state statutes and preparing for whatever she might try next. He was proven right on a crisp October morning. I was at work when my grandfather called to say Patricia had returned with what she claimed was a court order. She had 2 witnesses, a locksmith, and a portable filing cabinet full of violation notices. She announced that a judge had granted the HOA emergency access due to health and safety concerns. My grandfather asked to see the court order, and Patricia proudly produced a document that looked official at first glance. The problem was that my grandfather had spent decades reviewing legal documents. He immediately recognized that what Patricia was waving around was not a court order but a template she had downloaded from the internet and filled out herself. The judge's signature was obviously forged, and the case number did not match any format used by our county court. He pointed this out to her witnesses, who suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Patricia insisted the document was legitimate and ordered the locksmith to begin work. The locksmith, clearly sensing something was wrong, asked to see the court order himself. After examining it for less than 30 seconds, he packed up his tools and left, muttering something about not losing his license for nobody. Patricia screamed at him as he drove away, then turned her fury back on my grandfather. She declared that she did not need a locksmith, that she would enter the property herself to document violations. She claimed that denying her access was an admission of guilt. My grandfather stood his ground, warning her clearly and repeatedly that she was not authorized to enter his home. He even called Deputy Morrison again, putting the phone on speaker so Patricia could hear him reporting an attempted breaking and entering in progress. That was when Patricia completely lost control. She shoved past my grandfather, or tried to, but his police training kicked in. He sidestepped her rush, and she stumbled forward into the house. Before she could get more than 2 steps inside, he had retrieved his old handcuffs from the table by the door where he had placed them earlier. With practiced efficiency, he secured her wrists behind her back while reciting that she was under citizen's arrest for criminal trespass and attempted breaking and entering. Patricia's screams could probably be heard 3 blocks away. She writhed on the ground, demanding to be released, threatening lawsuits and criminal charges and the complete destruction of our lives. The 2 witnesses she had brought backed away quickly, not wanting any part of what was happening. One of them was actually filming the entire incident, which would prove very helpful later. Deputy Morrison arrived within minutes, followed closely by 2 other patrol cars. By this time, half the neighborhood had gathered to watch the HOA president being detained by a 72-year-old man with a walker. My grandfather explained the situation calmly, showing the deputies the fake court order and the security camera footage of Patricia forcing her way into our home. He also presented the dozens of harassing notices and documentation of Patricia's escalating campaign against us. Patricia was still screaming about false imprisonment and elderly abuse when the deputies reviewed the evidence. After confirming that the court order was indeed fraudulent, they informed Patricia that she was under arrest for criminal trespass, attempted breaking and entering, and forgery of a legal document. The look on her face when they transferred her from my grandfather's handcuffs to their own was priceless. The news spread through Pine Ridge Estates like wildfire. Within hours, stories began emerging from other homeowners who had been harassed by Patricia but were too intimidated to speak up. The elderly couple on Maple Drive who had been fined for having the wrong shade of white trim. The young family on Oak Street who had received violation notices for their children's playground equipment. The widower on Birch Lane who had been threatened with liens for his memorial garden. An emergency HOA board meeting was called for that evening. Patricia's husband, looking mortified, attended in her place to announce her immediate resignation from the board. The remaining members quickly voted to suspend all pending violation notices and to launch a full review of the bylaws Patricia had modified. They also voted to reimburse any fines collected during her tenure, which apparently totaled over $40,000. The criminal case against Patricia moved swiftly. Security footage from multiple homes showed a clear pattern of harassment and intimidation. The forged court order was evidence of intent to commit fraud. Her forced entry into our home, captured on our security cameras, was undeniable. Her lawyer tried to argue that she believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president, but the prosecutor pointed out that ignorance of the law was not a defense, especially when combined with forgery. Patricia ultimately pleaded guilty to reduced charges to avoid a trial. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay $5,000 in restitution to my grandfather. She was also barred from serving on any HOA board for 10 years. The look on her face when the judge read the sentence was one of complete disbelief, as if she could not comprehend how her crusade for neighborhood aesthetics had led to criminal conviction.